The notification pinged on my old tablet, a cheerful sound that usually meant a photo from my granddaughter, Lily, or a reminder for one of my gentle exercise classes. I smiled, tapping the screen. It was indeed from Lily, a video file. My heart warmed. Perhaps it was a clip of her school play or one of her funny cat videos. I am Agnes, 72 years young, a widow for a decade now. My life for the past 5 years had revolved around helping my son, David, and his family. After my Thomas passed, David had suggested I sell my larger home and move in with them. "It makes sense, Mum," he'd said, his voice earnest. "We can get a bigger place, you can help with Lily, and you won't be rattling around in that big house alone." The bigger place was purchased with a significant down payment from the sale of my home, and I'd quietly, consistently paid the mortgage payments ever since, wanting to ease their burden to ensure they had stability. I lived in a small annex connected to the main house, self-contained but close. I pressed play. The video was shaky, clearly filmed covertly. Lily's reflection was briefly visible in a dark TV screen. She must have been hiding. The audio, however, was chillingly clear. It was David's voice laced with a venom I'd never heard directed at me, though its dismissive undertones were familiar enough. He was speaking to his wife, Sarah. "She's just..." "There," David spat out, his voice tight with resentment. "Always underfoot. And for what? So she can feel important? It's my house, Sarah, not hers. She's just a worthless burden, honestly. If it weren't for the convenience, she'd have been in a home years ago." Sarah murmured something indistinct, a placating sound. "Convenience?" David almost laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Yes, the convenience of her pension helping out. But is it worth this, having to tiptoe around, listen to her endless stories?" My breath hitched. Worthless burden. The words slammed into me, each syllable a shard of ice piercing my heart. This from my son, whose scraped knees I'd bandaged, whose school fees I'd worked extra shifts to pay, whose current roof I was insuring stayed over his head. The tablet slipped from my numb fingers, clattering onto the small table. Shock, cold and absolute, flooded me. Disbelief was a flimsy shield against the raw pain. Tears welled, hot and furious, blurring the small, tidy room that suddenly felt like a prison cell I was paying rent on. The theme of this story, I suppose, is the cruelest betrayals often come masked in familial concern, and finding your worth again when those you love most try to strip it away. The immediate aftermath of seeing that video was a suffocating wave of nausea, and a grief so profound it felt like Thomas had died all over again. Worthless burden. The phrase echoed, a cruel taunt in the quiet of my annex. I picked up the tablet, my hand shaking, and replayed the segment, needing to confirm the horror to be sure I hadn't imagined it. David's voice, his words, were undeniably real, laced with contempt. Sarah's passive agreement, her failure to defend me, was a secondary wound, but a wound nonetheless. My first instinct, a primal urge, was to storm into the main house, to confront David, to demand an explanation, an apology, anything to negate the hideousness of what I'd heard. But what then? Would he deny it? Gaslight me? The David in that video was a stranger, cold and calculating. The thought of his face, contorted with that same disdain, looking at me as I pleaded for recognition of my value, was unbearable. Isolation, a familiar companion since Thomas's passing, descended with a new, suffocating weight. I was in their home, yet utterly alone, betrayed by my own child. Fear, sharp and cold, began to creep in. My entire financial security, beyond my modest pension, was tied up in this house. In him, I'd poured the proceeds of my marital home into this property, and I paid the hefty mortgage every single month from my savings and Thomas's insurance payout, an arrangement David had eagerly accepted, calling me his angel investor, with a smile that now seemed predatory. The contrast between his presented gratitude and his private contempt was a chasm I couldn't bridge. I looked around my small living space. It was comfortable, filled with my cherished belongings, but every item suddenly felt conditional, my presence tolerated only because of the convenience he'd sneered about. What if I stopped paying? The thought was terrifying. It was my safety net, ensuring I had a place, but it was also apparently the price of my son's resentment. I tried to call Lily, needing to hear her voice to understand why she'd sent it, but my call went straight to her voicemail. Perhaps she was at school, or perhaps she was afraid of being caught. Uncertainty gnawed at me. The vibrant life I thought I was contributing to, the family I believed I was an integral part of, felt like a carefully constructed illusion that had just shattered. I couldn't go back to the old way, couldn't unhear those words. The idea of sitting at their dinner table, exchanging pleasantries while worthless burden screamed in my mind, was impossible. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, the weight of his betrayal pressing down on me. A difficult choice began to form, a tiny, defiant spark in the overwhelming darkness. I would not be a burden, and I would certainly not be a worthless one. I would have to reclaim my independence, even if it meant dismantling the very foundation of my current life. The sacrifice would be immense, the path terrifyingly unclear, but the alternative, to continue living a lie, subsidizing my own devaluation, was no longer an option. The next morning, the sounds from the main house, David and Sarah getting ready for work, Lily for school, felt like noises from a distant, alien world. I stayed in my annex, the video playing on a loop in my mind. The thought of facing David, of seeing the duplicity in his eyes, was still too raw. My small savings, carefully managed to cover the mortgage and my personal needs, suddenly seemed wholly inadequate for forging a new life. But the alternative, staying here under this cloud of contempt, was unthinkable. My journey, I realized, wouldn't necessarily be a physical one to a new city, at least not immediately. It would be a journey of disentanglement, of reclaiming my assets and my dignity. The first step was information. I spent the morning online, researching my rights regarding the property. My name wasn't on the deed, a point David had glossed over at the time, saying it was simpler for financing. But I had a mountain of bank statements proving my initial capital injection and every single mortgage payment. This, I learned, might give me some leverage, a claim to an equitable interest. It was a sliver of hope, but a complex one. The new environment I found myself in wasn't a geographical location, but a harsh new reality of legal jargon and financial vulnerability. I felt an overwhelming sense of naivety, of having trusted too much. My lowest point came that afternoon. I'd made myself a cup of tea, but the food I'd tried to eat earlier sat like a stone in my stomach. I looked at a photograph of Thomas and me, young and optimistic on our wedding day. What would he think of this mess, of my son's callousness? A wave of despair washed over me. I was 72, facing a battle I never anticipated, against my own child, for my home and my self-respect. The thought of lawyers, of conflict, was exhausting before it even began. Broke wasn't quite the word, as I had my pension, but house poor, definitely, and so incredibly alone. Lily still hadn't called back, and a new fear surfaced. What if David found out she'd sent the video? What repercussions would she face? I had to protect her, too. That evening, I heard David's car pull into the drive. My heart hammered. I stayed in the annex, lights off, pretending to be out or asleep. The pretense was a flimsy shield, but it was all I had. The sensory details of my small space became acute. The ticking of the old mantel clock, the distant hum of their television, the scent of dinner cooking, a dinner I wouldn't be sharing. This self-imposed isolation was a necessary cocoon, but it was also a stark reminder of the emotional chasm that had opened. My journey away from the source of pain had to begin with drawing a line, financially and emotionally. The mortgage payment was due in a week. For the first time in 5 years, the automatic transfer wouldn't happen. That would be my first silent act of rebellion. A few days passed in a blur of anxious research and forced calm. I avoided contact with David and Sarah, offering brief polite nods if our paths crossed in the garden, my heart a cold knot in my chest. Then, one afternoon, as I was staring blankly at my bank statements, my tablet pinged. It was a message from Lily. "Grandma, are you okay? Can we talk? I'm at the library after school. Can you meet me? Please, I'm worried." Relief washed over me, so potent it made me dizzy. She was okay. She wanted to talk. The library was a short bus ride away, a neutral territory. When I arrived, Lily was waiting near the local history section, her young face etched with concern. The moment she saw me, she rushed forward and hugged me tightly. "Oh, Grandma, I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I didn't know if I should send it, but I couldn't let him. I couldn't let you not know what he was saying. It was horrible." We found a quiet corner, and Lily recounted how she'd overheard her parents arguing more frequently about money, about me. She'd filmed it impulsively, feeling a protective rage on my behalf. "Dad's been stressed," she said hesitantly, "but that doesn't make it right. What he said, it's not true, Grandma. You're not a burden. You do so much. And I know about the mortgage. I heard them talking about how they couldn't manage without your payments." Her words, her fierce loyalty, were a balm to my wounded spirit. Here was my first true ally, my own granddaughter, seeing the truth and standing up for it in her own brave way. "Thank you, my dear," I said, my voice trembling. It took incredible courage to do that, and you're right, it wasn't true. But hearing it changes things. I explained my decision to stop the mortgage payments, my voice low. Lily listened intently, her brow furrowed. "He'll be furious," she said quietly. "But, Grandma, it's your money. He has no right to expect it if he's going to treat you like that." Her validation was like a lifeline. We talked for over an hour. Lily, wise beyond her years, suggested I speak to a free legal aid service she'd found online. She even offered to come with me. That day, in the quiet sanctuary of the library, with my granddaughter by my side, I felt the first stirrings of hope, a sense of temporary safety and shared purpose. The path ahead was still daunting, but I wasn't entirely alone anymore. Lily's support, her unwavering belief in me, gave me the strength to take the next step. She was more than an ally. She was a beacon. The decision to stop the mortgage payment was made. the automatic transfer cancelled. The day it was due, a strange calm settled over me. It was an act of quiet defiance, a reclaiming of my financial autonomy. The following week was when the learning and adaptation truly began. I contacted the legal aid service Lily had found. Mrs. Davies, a kind, no-nonsense solicitor with understanding eyes, listened patiently to my story, reviewed the bank statements Lily had helped me organize, and even watched a brief, crucial segment of the video. "What your son said is deplorable, Agnes," she stated, her voice firm but compassionate. "And his expecting you to pay the mortgage under these circumstances is outrageous. While your name isn't on the deed, your substantial financial contribution, both initial and ongoing, gives you a strong case for a constructive trust or proprietary estoppel. Essentially, you have a demonstrable financial interest in the property." Those legal terms were new and intimidating, but Mrs. Davies explained them clearly. It wouldn't be a quick fix, but it was a path. She advised me to formally notify David, in writing, of my intention to cease payments and to seek a resolution regarding my investment. This was the hard part. Drafting that letter, with Mrs. Davies' help, was emotionally draining. Every word felt like a severing of ties, a declaration of a war I never wanted. The work involved was not physical labor, but the equally exhausting emotional and mental labor of confronting betrayal and fighting for what was rightfully mine. My small annex became my command center. I learned about property law, about mediation, about my rights as a cohabitant contributor. I spent hours poring over documents, my old reading glasses perched on my nose. There were initial failures, moments of overwhelming fear where I almost picked up the phone to tell David I'd reinstate the payment just to make the tension stop. But then I'd look at Lily's determined face in my mind's eye or replay David's callous words, and a new resolve would harden within me. My pension, though modest, was enough for my own needs if I was careful. I started a detailed budget, cutting back on non-essentials, a skill I hadn't needed to exercise so stringently in years. It was a practical, skill-building exercise in self-reliance. Resilience, I discovered, wasn't about being unbreakable. It was about picking yourself up after being shattered, piece by painstaking piece, and learning to stand on your own, even when your legs were trembling. The process was slow, arduous, but with each small step, understanding a legal document, making a difficult phone call, refusing to back down, I felt a tiny bit of competence and strength returning. The letter, sent by registered mail as Mrs. Davies advised, landed like a bombshell in the main house. I knew because the shouting started shortly after David would have gotten home from work and checked the post. I couldn't make out the words, but the furious, incredulous tone was unmistakable. Lily texted me later. "Dad is going crazy, non-stop yelling about the letter. Mom is just crying. He keeps saying, 'How could she do this to us?'" The irony wasn't lost on me. How could I do this to them? My integration into a new community wasn't about finding a new town. It was about forging stronger bonds with those who truly valued me and building a new, smaller but more authentic support system. Lily was my rock. She'd visit me in the annex, bringing me tea and library books, her presence a quiet reassurance. She became my conduit to the outside world, sometimes even sharing snippets of overheard conversations from the main house, not as gossip, but as information that might help. "Dad told Mom he's going to have to talk to you, Grandma," she'd report, her brow furrowed. "He said you can't just decide not to pay." Mrs. Davies, my solicitor, became another crucial ally. Her calm professional guidance was invaluable. She helped me understand the legal process, anticipated David's likely reactions, and bolstered my confidence when it wavered. "You are doing the right thing, Agnes," she'd say during our phone calls. "You are protecting your interests and, more importantly, your dignity." Even Mrs. Peterson from next door, a kind woman I'd only ever exchanged pleasantries with, seemed to sense the shift. She started inviting me over for coffee, offering a listening ear without prying. Her simple, uncomplicated friendship was a small but significant comfort. This supportive, albeit small circle was a stark contrast to the dismissive and controlling environment David had cultivated. He had taken my financial support for granted, seeing it as an entitlement while simultaneously devaluing my presence. Now, faced with the consequence of his disrespect, his carefully maintained control was slipping. The validation I received from Lily, Mrs. Davies, and even Mrs. Peterson wasn't for conforming or sacrificing, but for standing up for myself. My character, my resolve, was being recognized. I wasn't the worthless burden David had painted me as. I was a woman with rights, with resources, and with allies who saw my true worth. This growing sense of community, however small, was instrumental in boosting my confidence for the inevitable confrontation to come. The turning point arrived a few weeks later. David had tried various tactics: angry voicemails I didn't answer, attempts to corner me in the garden which I politely sidestepped, even sending Sarah to try and appeal to my better nature, a conversation I cut short by stating all communication should go through Mrs. Davies. Then came a formal letter from his newly appointed solicitor proposing a meeting. "He's realizing he can't just bully you into submission," Mrs. Davies commented when I forwarded it to her. "He knows you have a case, and the video Lily took, should it come to it, would be very compelling evidence of his attitude and your untenable living situation." That video, it was my ace in the hole, a stark record of his contempt. The thought of using it made me feel ill, yet it was also a source of power. My self-worth, which had plummeted after hearing David's words, was slowly rebuilding. It was no longer tied to his approval or my role as the family financier. I was Agnes, a woman who had raised a son, loved a husband, and who deserved respect, not dismissal. I found myself sketching again, something I hadn't done in years. My small annex window overlooked a patch of roses, and I started drawing them, the intricate details of the petals, the play of light and shadow. It was a small act of reclaiming a forgotten part of myself, a quiet joy that was entirely my own. I even started volunteering at the local library one morning a week, helping to shelve books. Being around people, contributing in a small way, felt good. I was earning my own sense of purpose, independent of my family drama. I began to envision a future, still hazy, but there. Perhaps a small rented apartment, a place truly my own, funded by whatever settlement I could reach with David, supplemented by my pension. A place where I wasn't a burden, but the mistress of my own quiet life. The prospect was daunting, but also exhilarating. I was no longer just reacting. I was planning, taking control. The upcoming meeting with David and his solicitor felt less like a terrifying ordeal and more like a necessary step towards that future. I would have Mrs. Davies by my side and Lily's courageous spirit in my heart. My money, my home, my peace of mind. These were what I was fighting for. The invitation to mediate arrived via Mrs. Davies. David and his solicitor proposed a meeting at a neutral legal office. The news didn't send me into a panic as it might have a month earlier. Instead, I felt a grim sort of readiness. Mrs. Davies and I had prepared. We'd gone over my financial contributions, the timeline of payments, and the emotional impact of David's words, substantiated by the video Lily had bravely secured. "Remember, Agnes," Mrs. Davies advised the day before the meeting, "we are there to negotiate a fair settlement for your financial interest in the property. His emotional outbursts or attempts to guilt-trip you are irrelevant to the financial facts. Stay calm, let me do most of the talking, but don't be afraid to state your position clearly if needed." Lily, bless her heart, gave me a small smooth stone she'd found on a beach trip. "For courage, Grandma," she'd whispered, squeezing my hand. I slipped it into my pocket. The threat from the past, embodied by David, felt less potent now. His power over me had been rooted in my love for him, my desire for family harmony, and my financial entanglement. Now, love was deeply wounded, harmony shattered by his own actions, and the financial ties were being formally addressed. My divorce from his emotional manipulation was well underway. I thought about the sacrifices I'd made, not just financially, but the small everyday accommodations, the deferring of my own needs and desires to fit into his family's life, all under the illusion of mutual care. That illusion was gone. What remained was a clear-eyed assessment of the situation and a determination to secure my own future. I wasn't seeking revenge, just restitution and release. The thought of seeing David, of facing his anger or his feigned contrition, still caused a flutter of apprehension, but it was overshadowed by a stronger sense of resolve. I had allies, I had evidence, and most importantly, I had rediscovered my own backbone. This wasn't just about money or a house. It was about reclaiming my dignity and ensuring that the rest of my life would be lived on my own terms, not as a convenience or a burden to anyone. The meeting room was sterile and impersonal, dominated by a large mahogany table. David sat opposite me, next to his solicitor, a man with a practiced air of weary patience. My son looked strained, his usual confident demeanor replaced by a sullen resentment. He avoided my gaze. Mrs. Davies sat beside me, calm and professional, her presence a reassuring anchor. The meeting began with formalities. David's solicitor made an opening statement, vaguely acknowledging my contributions, while emphasizing that David was the sole legal owner and that my ceasing mortgage payments had put him in a difficult position. Mrs. Davies then calmly laid out our case. The substantial initial investment, the 5 years of consistent mortgage payments, and the clear expectation of a secure home for life. She mentioned the untenable living situation that had necessitated my seeking legal counsel, a polite reference to the video which she noted we had in our possession. At the mention of an untenable situation, David shifted uncomfortably. "This is ridiculous," he finally blurted out, his voice rising. "She's my mother. Of course she helped out. That's what family does. This isn't some business deal." Mrs. Davies held up a hand. "Mr. Thompson, while familial relationships are indeed important, your mother's financial contributions have been significant and consistent, creating a clear, equitable interest. Furthermore," her voice hardened slightly, "your definition of what family does seems to have been rather one-sided. Calling your mother, who is subsidizing your lifestyle a worthless burden is hardly conducive to a supportive family environment. Wouldn't you agree? David's face flushed a dark red. He opened his mouth, then closed it, shooting a venomous glare at me. His solicitor quickly interjected, trying to steer the conversation back to financials, but the damage was done. The worthless burden comment hung in the air. I met David's angry gaze, my own calm and steady. "David," I said, my voice quiet but firm, surprising even myself. "I heard what you said. Lily recorded it. You called me a worthless burden while I was paying for the roof over your head, over your children's heads. There's no going back from that. This isn't about being ungrateful or vindictive. This is about ensuring I have my own security, a security I paid for." His anger seemed to deflate slightly, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief, perhaps at my directness, or perhaps at the finality in my tone. He'd likely expected me to crumble, to be cowed by the legal setting or by his anger. He didn't recognize the woman sitting opposite him. The climax was not a shouting match, but this quiet, firm articulation of my truth and my resolve, backed by the undeniable evidence he knew we possessed. His solicitor began to talk about settlement figures, his tone suddenly more conciliatory. The negotiation was tense but progressed. David, clearly shaken by my direct confrontation and the implicit threat of the video being used more widely, became more subdued. His solicitor, realizing they were on weak ground morally and potentially legally, shifted towards damage control and finding a practical solution. They couldn't refute the bank statements detailing my payments. The worthless burden comment, though not a direct legal point for financial settlement, had undeniably soured their position and highlighted the emotional distress I'd endured, which Mrs. Davies subtly leveraged. After several hours, we reached an agreement. David would remortgage the house to buy out my established financial interest. It was a significant sum, reflecting both my initial down payment and a portion of the mortgage payments I'd made, essentially a return of my capital. It wasn't a windfall, but it was fair and it was enough. Enough for me to find my own small place, to live independently, and to have a cushion for the future. He looked pale and defeated as he agreed to the terms, his signature on the preliminary agreement small and tight. He didn't apologize. I hadn't expected him to. His defeat was emotional and financial, not necessarily one of remorse. He would have to manage his own mortgage now, without my subsidy. As we left the office, Mrs. Davies squeezed my arm. "You did wonderfully, Agnes." I felt a profound sense of relief, a lightness I hadn't experienced in months. The first person I called was Lily. "It's settled, my dear," I told her, my voice thick with emotion. "Thank you. I couldn't have done this without your courage." The following weeks were busy. I found a lovely small 2-bedroom apartment in a quiet complex not too far from the library and Mrs. Peterson. It had a little balcony perfect for a few pots of roses. Moving out of the annex was symbolic. Each box packed was a step further away from the pain and betrayal. Lily helped me, her cheerful energy making the process less daunting. David and Sarah remained distant, their interactions with me minimal and strained. The day the settlement money cleared in my bank account, I took a deep breath. It was done. My new apartment, though much smaller than the house I'd helped pay for, felt like a palace. It was mine. Every cushion, every teacup was chosen by me for me. I started painting again, properly this time, setting up a small easel by the balcony door. My friendship with Mrs. Peterson blossomed, and Lily was a regular visitor, filling my small home with laughter. Reflecting on the journey, David's cruel words, intended to wound, had inadvertently been the catalyst for my liberation. He had called me a worthless burden, but in fighting back, in reclaiming my independence and my financial security, I had proven my worth to the most important person, myself. My life was quieter now, simpler, but it was authentically mine, filled with peace, creativity, and the love of a granddaughter who had shown me the true meaning of loyalty. The future felt hopeful, a canvas waiting for new colors.